They said, no, the duty of a good Catholic, God wants good Catholics to obey their prince. That is, it was obedience to the prince, and therefore the notion of citizenship was really quite disturbing for them. And of course, you have Muslims, as you know, there are Muslims who also argue that democracy is not in keeping with the Quran, it is not in keeping with the tradition, because very much they wrestle with this. Gulen belongs to this Muslim stream that is open to democracy and affirms citizenship and co-responsibility. Gulen begins to, I think it's important for me as a theologian to really understand the kind of logic and principle that he uses in the reading of the Quran, because I think that we have to, first of all, defend this progressive reading of the Quran against other kinds of Muslim trends, the Wahhabism that is supported by Saudi Arabia and supported with a great deal of money, that is a very different reading of the Quran. So you want to, and secondly, you want to explain to secular people too, when you speak to them that you are Muslims, and you have these progressive ideas, they say, well, are you quite sure that this is true, that this is really true? Aren't you really liberals and you disguise your convictions behind these nice pious words? Or is there real theological foundation? It is really founded on the Quran, and therefore, for me, as a theologian, this is very important to find out the principles of interpretation that Gulen uses. And unfortunately, I don't read Turkish, so I can't do this work. There is no English book written on this. I'm interested in Islam. I'm fascinated by this. I admire this religion enormously. I just published a book on the theology of Tariq Ramadan, who is also a progressive thinking, reflecting Muslim, who writes his theological books in French, and so I can read them. I would love to read more of Gulen, but I cannot. But I want to talk more about him, what I do read. There is, first of all, the conviction, and this was mentioned before, that Islam has also a universal message, that Islam has a Sharia addressed to believers, but there is a universal message addressed to the whole world, and that is an understanding of the human being and the vocation of the human being and the origin of the human being and God. And the Prophet was convinced that this message about the human being and about the cosmos was rational. That is, the Prophet believed that human intelligence was able to understand this. To me, it is interesting that in the preaching of the Prophet, he never used miracles to show anything. I mean, this is quite a difference from the New Testament, that the Prophet never used miracles because there was the conviction that this is so evident, rationally evident, the one God, the origin and the creator, that he thought that this was something that human intelligence could grasp. And he thought, of course, of human intelligence in some sense as the light, participating in the light, which is God. And so there is this universal message, and that we are all together called to serve to the same virtues. You spoke about the universal virtues, the universal values. I mean, this wouldn't need an entire lecture. I mean, there are some people who deny universal values. I defend them, but I can't do this here now. But there are some people who say there aren't any universal values. Postmoderns, for instance, tell you, postmodernism says there are no universal values. Values are always culturally located, and therefore in different parts of the world you have different values. And postmoderns say we must be tolerant and accept all these values, and therefore they make tolerance the universal value. That is, you can't really escape it. Once you think globally, you can't really escape it, that there are universal values. at least we can strain after universality. And but we must study the sciences. We must not rest with sciences. We must become scientists ourselves and produce. So, secondly, he believed that Muslims had fallen asleep and they should be awake, that the great Muslim tradition was focused on achievement, the great Muslim achievement, the great works of art, the great temples, the great achievements, and therefore he wanted to awaken in Muslims, again, the confidence that their religion, their faith, makes them creative. And something that he also, that is in the conflict, conflict with modernity. I mentioned modernity. Science is new, the notion of citizenship is new. And thirdly, what is new in modernity is that you are called upon to better yourself, to better your conditions. That is, in the pre-modern times, certainly in Catholicism and in the Lutheran tradition, you accepted your state in life as providential. That is, if your father was a shoemaker, you were a shoemaker. You didn't ask, why are we poor? This was God's will. That is, there was a sense of tradition, a sense of providence. You accepted your state in life. You didn't think it was up to you to work very hard, to go to university, to make more money, to live in a nicer house. This wasn't regarded as proper, neither in Lutheranism nor in Catholicism, prior to the coming of modernity. Calvinism was different. This is the interesting thing about the Presbyterian, the Calvinist tradition. This that spread in France, and then in Switzerland, and then in Holland, and then Britain, and then in North America. There was the beginning of modernity. That is, you want to better yourself. You work hard in order to improve your conditions. Now, Islam, before the encounter with modernity, was also very much the idea of providence. Where you are is where God wants you to be, and therefore you have to accept this. Already Al-Afghani at the end of the 19th century was opposed to this, and at that time he still talked to the princes and said, why don't you do anything to inspire people to leave their poverty? Why do you let things be the way they are? Society is meant to be different. Why don't you act? And so this modernity, this is taken, I don't have really any kind of notes. This isn't too systematic. I think I should write this up. That is the modernity, therefore, demanded for these religions to reread their sacred texts, to find in their sacred texts passages that were really neglected.